Caleb Mercer had rehearsed this week down to the minute. He could picture the florist arranging the last roses, the ribbon on his boutonniere, the exact shade of Leela's dress, ivory with a whisper of lace that always made her look like she belonged in a movie still. He had polished his vows until the edges were buttery smooth, the kind of vows you read once and then pretend you wrote yourself. Thursday, 7 days before the wedding, everything started to misalign. It began small. Leela's cheek brushed his in bed and she tasted like lemon and cigarettes, a scent that didn't belong to her. Then her phone lit up in the middle of dinner, a name he didn't know, the smile that came across her face as she read the message. He told himself to breathe. He told himself to trust. He told himself not to be that fiancé, the one who sniffs and snoops and deserts the altar of faith. But men who have rehearsed things down to the minute get good at rehearsing suspicions too. Caleb isn't proud of how it came apart. A shared ride app receipt he wasn't supposed to see. A lipstick stain on a scarf tucked in a jacket he usually didn't touch. On Friday, he followed a breadcrumb trail of receipts and nonsense to a tiny bistro across town and found a photo, not on her phone, but on another woman's public feed, of Leela smiling into another man's face like she'd found a late-night treasure. They were holding hands. The caption was dumb and earnest. The date was 2 nights ago. Leela called and said, "I need some space," like that was a normal sentence. Then she vanished. Her apartment had a suitcase half-packed and a note of half-truths. "I'm sorry, don't wait for me." This is the part of the story that people expect to be poetic. He sat on the floor and let the silence hug him like a guilty friend. Instead, Caleb went to the photo, zoomed into the background and saw an address printed on the coffee cup, a hotel downtown. He drove there on autopilot. The man in the photo, Adam Blackwood, someone Leela had once described as a bad idea who looked good on a motorcycle. Caleb waited outside with the kind of patience that pretends to be dignity. At midnight, he watched Leela and Adam lean into a taxi. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He did what he had always promised himself he would do if ever faced with betrayal. He collected proof and prepared a plan. Except what no rehearsed plan covers is the way an angry man starts to enjoy being clever. The plan skewed into performance, and performances require an audience. He made his first move in a way that felt like a stab of both revenge and irony. He arranged, precisely, almost absurdly, to run into the person Leela hated more than anyone, Vivienne Hart. Vivienne was Leela's old rival from back when both parents hopped cities and social circles like they were trading cards. She once posted an open letter about Leela's ethical thinness and still managed to make brunch feels like a courtroom. Vivienne also happened to be independently wealthy, tastefully ruthless, and publicly unimpressed by anything resembling sentiment. Caleb told himself he wasn't marrying Vivienne out of passion. He told himself it was strategic, a marriage of alliance that would let him cut off Leela's family, block their financial favors, and watch the deck of influence he'd built with Leela's name on it collapse like a bad set piece. It was payback without screaming. Elegant, subtle, merciless. Vivienne said yes in 9 hours. She liked the theater of it, a man scorned, a marriage of convenience, the delicious spectacle of humiliating the woman who had humiliated her in school hallways and charity galas. They shared a smirk and a champagne toast, and the kind of kiss that felt like a handshake in which both parties kept their better weapons holstered. Caleb left the hotel that night with a different plan in his pocket and a cold, compulsive certainty in his chest. He could turn this into something Leela never imagined. He could cut her off. He could make her family look small and petty. He could turn the tables. What he didn't know yet, and what made the whole thing dangerous and delicious and utterly human, was that life delights in irony. Sometimes you plot revenge and find a small, unexpected thing in the margins. A laugh that sounds like a future, or a hand that fits yours better than a grudge ever could. Caleb's wedding to Vivienne was scheduled 3 months after Leela disappeared. He walked down the aisle feeling the kind of calm that comes from meticulous planning, the kind where you're almost too busy observing to feel nervous. Guests murmured about the strange speed of it, about how the scorned fiancé had suddenly attached himself to a woman everyone assumed he disliked. Caleb smiled politely and let them whisper. Whispering is the soundtrack of revenge. Vivienne was flawless. She didn't clutch his arm too tightly or make him sweat. Instead, she smiled that slow, knowing smile, the one that said, "We know exactly what we're doing and so does everyone else." The ceremony itself was brief but elegant. No one cried too hard. No one fainted. Caleb's parents whispered congratulations, carefully ignoring that their son was marrying a woman they had once thought a temporary annoyance. As they filed into the reception hall, the tension in the room was deliciously palpable, like a balloon filled with champagne, ready to pop. During the reception, Caleb's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. He hesitated, then opened it. "Funny how life works. She's back in town. You'll find her where the world feels loudest." His stomach sank, then lifted in the way adrenaline lifts the body when you realize the game is just beginning. Leela was back. She hadn't been gone forever. She had vanished like a ghost, only to return with the uncanny timing of a dramatic novel. Vivienne noticed the tension creeping over Caleb's face. She leaned close and whispered, "Don't worry. Let's enjoy our show." She poured more champagne into his glass, a quiet ally in a war that hadn't been declared yet, at least not publicly. Caleb's mind raced. Leela wasn't just cheating. She was flaunting her freedom. And now she'd inadvertently become the final piece of his revenge, the ghost haunting the wedding of the man she had tried to control. He didn't know yet if Leela was coming alone, or if the man in the photo, Adam Blackwood, would appear with her. But one thing was certain. His life, which he had been calibrating for revenge, was suddenly twisting into a story that felt dangerously entertaining. He raised his glass to Vivienne. "Here's to chaos and careful plotting," he thought, and to seeing just how badly karma can misbehave. The first whispers of Leela's return began circulating by dessert. Caleb's lips twitched. The real fun was about to start. The reception was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers refracted the golden light across polished marble floors, and laughter ricocheted against the walls like champagne bubbles. Caleb moved through the crowd with Vivienne at his side, exchanging polite nods and whispered quips about minor betrayals, the social kind. Then the doors swung open. All chatter froze. Caleb felt a prickle on the back of his neck, and there she was, Leela. She wasn't the girl who had vanished in a cloud of half-truths. She looked sharper, brighter, and somehow more untouchable. Her dress was a bold red, not the subtle elegance she'd once favored, but a color that screamed, "Look at me." She smiled, not nervously, but with the calm assurance of someone who knows exactly what she's walking into. And yes, she wasn't alone. Adam Blackwood trailed behind her, looking like he had stepped straight out of a magazine editorial. Caleb's chest tightened, but not with fear. This was predictable, calculated, part of the script he'd imagined. He approached the pair, every step measured. Vivienne followed silently, her presence like a chess queen shadowing a pawn's calculated move. Leela's smile faltered slightly, perhaps recognizing Caleb in a way she hadn't expected. "Caleb," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and something unspoken, perhaps guilt, perhaps defiance. He smiled politely, a subtle curve that promised nothing but observation. "Leela, what a coincidence." Vivienne stepped forward, her hand lightly brushing Caleb's arm. "We were just talking about unexpected reunions," she said with a sweetness that masked a sharp edge. Leela's eyes flicked toward her, a flash of recognition and annoyance passing through her expression. Adam, ever the secondary character in this unfolding drama, tried to insert himself into the conversation with a joke about weddings and timing. Caleb ignored him. He didn't need to engage. Leela had walked back into his life exactly when he needed her to witness his control, to see the consequences of her choices. The first act of revenge had begun, and Caleb, much to his own surprise, felt a twinge of something entirely new. Not just the thrill of a plan executed perfectly, but the spark of a story that could twist in directions he hadn't anticipated. The question now was simple. How do you punish someone who thinks they're untouchable without looking like you care? Caleb's plan wasn't dramatic, no viral videos, no shouting in the press. He preferred the slow, surgical sort of revenge that felt like watching a house of cards topple once you've removed the right one. First, he began with what Leela's family valued most: access and appearance. He sent a single, impeccably composed email to the family's accountant and to the small board that controlled a trust fund Leela's mother managed. The message was neutral, almost bureaucratic: changes to beneficiary directives, immediate suspension of discretionary loans pending an internal review, and a notice that Caleb, as Vivienne's husband, would be present at the next trustees' meeting. The grammar was cold and correct. It said everything without saying much. Minutes turned into days. Invitations Leela's mother used to accept: gallery openings, charity luncheons, school fund committees, either stopped arriving or came as awkward, "We regret to inform" style notes. Friends who had once flirted with influence suddenly felt the weight of new alliances. The social pressure tightened like a noose made of satin ribbons. At brunch one weekend, Leela's sister cornered Caleb by the smoked salmon. "You don't have to do this," she said, eyes glossy with something between hurt and entitlement. "We're family." Caleb looked at her, at the way she still expected favors, forgiveness, and front row seats, and found himself answering more honestly than he intended. "You lost the right to be surprised," he said. "You gave it away when she chose to disappear." There was an audible sting. Someone nearly dropped a mimosa. Vivienne watched, amused and a little proud. She had expected Caleb to be a fierce partner. What surprised her was how he could make cruelty look like paperwork. They began appearing together at the right events, smiling in the photos that trickled through social feeds. The effect was immediate. The Hart-Mercer alliance became a single, sharper blade in local society. Invitations shifted. Vendors who'd once flirted with Leela's mother called Vivienne instead. The message was simple and humiliating. Leela's family no longer mattered quite as much. But revenge has a way of complicating even the cleanest calculus. When Caleb watched Vivienne deliver a quietly crushing comment at a luncheon, the kind of remark perfectly pitched between cordial and cutting, he felt something unexpected, approval that went past strategy. He liked the way she read a room, the dry humor she folded into a compliment. It was a small, dangerous admiration that felt suspiciously like attraction. Leela reacted in ways that were not always dignified. She flitted between fury and defiance, trying the social equivalent of a U-turn to reclaim status. At a gallery opening, she approached Caleb, gaze hard. "You think you can replace me with theatrics and etiquette?" she asked. Caleb let his smile do the talking. "I didn't replace you," he said. "I just proved something. People will choose the version of life that benefits them most." "You're poisonous," she spat, as if spite could be a diagnosis. "That's a shame," Vivienne called over from across the room, lifting her wine with the faintest smirk. "We're very allergic to mediocrity." When Caleb heard her laugh later that night in the car, a short, genuine sound that had nothing to do with cruelty, he felt the floor shift beneath his plan. The glittering revenge he'd built was beginning to show seams. He told himself it didn't matter. He still had milestones to hit: freeze accounts, remove certain patrons, ensure that Leela's mother could no longer casually underwrite scandals with a check. Every cut was precise. Every word in his letters read like a scalpel. But between the meetings, the spreadsheets, and the column inches that no one quite wrote but everyone felt, Vivienne and Caleb started sharing small, ridiculous moments. A shared eye roll at a bridezilla who had somehow invited herself to a charity gala. A simultaneous reach for the last piece of creme brulee. A private joke about the absurdity of being married to make a statement, only to find that statements sometimes have consequences that include laughter. Caleb hated that laughter. He told himself it was collateral. But one evening, after a particularly vicious trustees meeting where Vivienne had delivered the final, polite blow, she sat next to him on a bench outside the hall. For a heartbeat, they were just two people inhaling the same cold night. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "I did," he answered, "but I didn't want to like it." She tilted her head. "You're admitting guilt and pleasure in the same breath. That's very human." He found that he didn't want to correct her. Leela's return to town wasn't subtle, and she seemed to know it. She appeared at every public event, every gala, every charity auction, often with Adam Blackwood by her side, sometimes solo. Social media picked up on it immediately. Leela Mercer spotted it. Headlines trailed behind her like a shadow. Caleb watched all of it, part fascination, part strategy. Every sighting was an opportunity to confirm she hadn't changed, to measure her influence, to ensure that every maneuver he'd made was not in vain. At the same time, the absurdity of it all began to sink in. She was like a ghost haunting her own narrative, a story that should have ended months ago but instead kept popping up like an uninvited subplot. He began leaving notes, small, subtle ones like breadcrumbs for Vivienne, a text during an art auction that read, "Watch the ghost," or a sticky note tucked into her agenda. She doesn't know the rules yet. Vivienne, ever amused, began turning these breadcrumbs into entertainment. "We're like the protagonists in a very bad drama series," she said one night as they reviewed Leela's social media appearances over dinner. Caleb couldn't help but laugh. She was right. He could feel the thrill of it. Leela had been the main character in his life, the story that consumed him, and now she was the supporting role in a tale he was authoring in real time. Then came the night at the charity gala, where Leela made the mistake of underestimating both Caleb and Vivienne. She entered wearing a gown of sapphire silk, a color that made every camera flash cling to her like fireflies. Adam trailed behind her, smiling a rehearsed smile, while Leela's eyes scanned the room. And then she saw him, Caleb, standing beside Vivienne, calm, collected, and utterly untouchable. Caleb held his glass of champagne and raised it in a subtle, almost mocking toast. Vivienne followed, her smile quiet but sharp. Leela froze for a heartbeat, not with fear, but with the realization that her return had not gone unnoticed, and that the game had already moved past her. "You look different," Leela said, her voice carrying a mixture of admiration and frustration. "I do," Caleb said simply, "but some things don't change, like timing, for instance." She tried to speak, to reclaim a moment, but Vivienne leaned close to Caleb and whispered something in a way only he could hear. "She's playing checkers. We're playing chess." Caleb felt a thrill unlike any he had experienced before. Revenge had its own kind of satisfaction, yes, but strategy, real, deliberate, surgical strategy, came with a deliciously addictive high. Leela's return, rather than complicating his life, had provided the perfect stage for a performance that he had only just begun to direct. And somewhere in the midst of all of it, he realized something dangerous. The more he plotted, the more he began to admire Vivienne, not just as an ally, but as someone who could match him in wit, patience, and subtlety. The ghost, he decided, would haunt the spotlight for a while longer, but Caleb had already changed the rules of the show. Caleb started keeping a mental map of Leela's movements. Every appearance, every social media post, every whispered rumor, he cataloged them like data points in a very satisfying revenge algorithm. He wasn't obsessed, he was thorough. Vivienne became his partner in the process. Together, they attended the right events at the right times, smiling, laughing, and casually demonstrating that the Mercer-Hart alliance was stronger than any past betrayal. It was subtle, almost surgical, but the effect on Leela's family was immediate. Invitations dried up. Mutual friends started taking sides without anyone even realizing it was happening. Then came the subtle war of information. Caleb would hear something about Leela's plans and relay it to Vivienne with a sly comment. "She's heading to the gala tonight. Nothing big, just the usual drama." Vivienne would respond with a smirk, already 3 moves ahead. Let's make it the most unforgettable one she's ever attended. And so they did. At the gala, Vivienne casually introduced herself to Leela's contacts, delivering compliments that were so pointedly polite they left a sting. Caleb's presence beside her reinforced the message. Power had shifted. Leela's attempts to dominate the room with her charm were undercut by the quiet, confident force of the couple she had underestimated. Caleb also made a subtle move behind the scenes. A single phone call that ensured Leela's ex-business contacts would miss an important networking dinner, forcing her to scramble for explanations. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was precise, almost elegant in its execution. What surprised Caleb most, however, wasn't the effectiveness of the plan. It was the thrill he felt when Vivienne laughed at his dry, sarcastic comments. He realized that in the middle of revenge, he had started enjoying her company in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. One evening, after a particularly satisfying victory in their subtle war, Caleb and Vivienne were alone in his apartment. He poured them each a glass of whiskey and leaned back, feeling the weight of the day lift. "You know," he said, swirling the amber liquid, "I thought revenge would feel empty, but this is oddly satisfying." Vivienne raised an eyebrow. "Oddly satisfying." "Yes," he admitted. "Watching her scramble, seeing the consequences, it's fun, but dangerous. And you," he gestured at her, "are dangerously amusing." Vivienne laughed, a soft, warm sound that made him forget briefly why any of this had started. "Careful, Caleb, fun can be addictive." He smirked. "I've got a good dealer." For the first time since Leela's betrayal, Caleb felt something more than anger. He felt the dangerous thrill of control, the intoxicating joy of partnership, and though he wouldn't admit it, a spark of something resembling affection. But the war wasn't over. Leela was still in play, and Caleb knew that the next move would need to be both bold and precise. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, a small envelope, cream-colored, embossed with a gold seal. Caleb recognized the handwriting instantly, Leela's. He didn't open it immediately. He turned it over in his hands, weighing the possibilities. Vivienne appeared behind him, curious. Another surprise from the ghost. Caleb smirked, possibly or a trap. He tore the envelope open and pulled out a single card. It was an invitation to a private charity gala hosted by none other than Leela herself. The words were simple, elegant, and dripping with understated confidence. "You are cordially invited. Dress sharp. Hearts will be tested." Caleb held it up. "Hearts will be tested," he read aloud, chuckling dryly. "She's still dramatic." Vivienne leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee. "Or she's desperate to prove she still matters." "Either way, we attend, but on our terms." Caleb agreed. They began to plan. The goal wasn't to confront Leela directly, that would be too obvious. Instead, they would attend as a united front, demonstrate control, and subtly remind everyone in attendance who held influence. The night of the gala arrived. Leela was radiant, the room buzzing around her like bees to nectar. Adam Blackwood stayed close, but Caleb noticed subtle signs of tension. Leela's eyes flickered to him repeatedly, the charm she wielded so easily beginning to crack under the pressure. Caleb and Vivienne entered together, their appearance orchestrated for maximum effect. The room felt different the moment they walked in, whispers trailing behind them, subtle shifts in attention, a social gravity pulling everyone toward their orbit. Leela caught sight of them almost immediately. Her smile tightened. She approached, attempting casual conversation, but Caleb's polite distance and Vivienne's quiet, sharp commentary made her realize that this wasn't the same situation she had controlled before. "You look very coordinated," Leela said, trying to mask irritation as charm. Caleb smiled, unbothered. "We like to make an impression," he replied. Vivienne added casually, "It's a team effort." Leela faltered, realizing that her usual tactics, charm, flirtation, subtle intimidation weren't enough. The dynamic had shifted, and Caleb, once the scorned fiancé, was now the orchestrator of the scene. Caleb knew this was only the beginning. Leela would try to reclaim her influence, but he and Vivienne were ready not with anger, but with strategy, precision, and a quietly growing amusement at watching her flounder. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Caleb felt that spark again, the one that made him wonder if, in the middle of revenge, he might have stumbled upon something far more complicated. The gala was in full swing, glittering with chandeliers and murmurs of wealth and influence. Leela moved through the crowd like a queen reclaiming her throne, but Caleb and Vivienne were already a step ahead. Every greeting, every polite nod, every subtle smile worked as a silent reminder. The balance of power had shifted. Caleb noticed something odd, though. Leela's usual charm was faltering, but not in the predictable way. She wasn't just flustered by their presence. She was overcompensating, making bold gestures that seemed designed to draw attention to herself. Every word she spoke was slightly louder, every laugh a touch forced. That was her misstep. Caleb signaled Vivienne with a subtle tilt of his head, and she understood immediately. They moved through the crowd in sync, guiding conversations, placing themselves strategically near key influencers, and subtly undermining Leela's attempts to dominate the room. It wasn't obvious. The elegance of it was that no one could accuse them of anything other than being impressive. Then Leela made the mistake of approaching one of Caleb's old friends, attempting to charm him with a story about a new project. Caleb intercepted with a casual introduction, smoothly shifting the conversation, praising the friend's achievements while making Leela seem a touch intrusive. The friend laughed politely, clearly impressed by Caleb's tact. Vivienne leaned close, whispering in Caleb's ear, "She's panicking, and it's beautiful." Caleb chuckled quietly. "Like a storm in a teacup," he replied. But the misstep wasn't just social. Adam Blackwood, Leela's steadfast companion, began to fidget, subtly revealing that Leela's control over her own narrative was weakening. Caleb observed, noting every twitch, every slight hesitation. He could almost taste the impending collapse, a slow, graceful unraveling that made all the planning worthwhile. By the end of the night, Leela's charm had lost its edge, her influence diminished by the quiet, precise dominance of Caleb and Vivienne. She left the gala slightly deflated, Adam trailing behind, while Caleb and Vivienne lingered to enjoy the aftermath. As they walked home, Vivienne slipped her hand into Caleb's. "This is getting fun," she said. Caleb smiled, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Yes, but the best part," he said, "is that it's just beginning." Caleb had been meticulous about controlling every angle, every appearance, every whispered rumor. But even the best-laid plans have a flaw, and his came in the form of an unexpected ally, Leela's younger cousin, Emma. Emma had always been quiet, observing from the sidelines, a background player in Leela's dramas and Caleb's revenge. But now, she approached him one afternoon at a coffee shop, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "Caleb," she began, I think Leela's making a mistake." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what might that be?" She's not thinking clearly. She's trying to fight this social war, but she doesn't see how much it's hurting everyone around her. Her family, her friends, even Adam. You're not the enemy here, at least not entirely." Caleb considered this. It was true, his revenge had been calculated, precise, surgical. He wasn't cruel beyond necessity, and yet hearing this from someone inside Leela's world gave him pause. "Why tell me this?" he asked. Emma hesitated. "Because you're different. You don't just lash out. You plan. You make your moves carefully. I think maybe you can help Leela see sense without completely destroying her." Caleb looked at her, weighing the risk. An ally inside Leela's family could be useful, but more than that, it gave him a new perspective. Revenge wasn't just about humiliation or dominance. It could also be about creating clarity, making people understand consequences while maintaining dignity. Vivienne, of course, had been watching the conversation from across the room. When Caleb returned to her side, she asked with a sly smile, "Recruiting spies now?" Caleb smirked. "Not spies, allies, sometimes even enemies can be useful." Vivienne laughed softly. "Just don't get sentimental." Caleb nodded, but inside he felt a strange twinge, the first hint that his revenge story might be more complicated than he planned. Allies could shift the game in unexpected ways, and Emma's appearance reminded him that sometimes the human element is messier than strategy. That night, as Caleb reviewed Leela's recent moves, he realized that having someone inside her circle gave him more than an advantage. It gave him insight into her true intentions, and that insight would be invaluable for the next step in his carefully orchestrated plan. The following week brought an unexpected twist. Leela, frustrated by her failing attempts to reclaim influence, made a bold move. She hosted a private dinner for a few key socialites, the kind of event designed to showcase charm, wealth, and control. Caleb, armed with Emma's insights, knew exactly what to expect. He and Vivienne arrived fashionably late, a move that immediately drew attention. Leela's smile, so polished in photos and social posts, faltered ever so slightly when she saw them. Caleb caught the moment, the micro-expression of someone realizing that the game had changed. Throughout the evening, he observed Leela's attempts to dominate the conversation. She directed jokes, steered topics, and tried to insert herself into the center of influence. Yet Vivienne's calm presence beside Caleb subtly redirected attention, their quiet coordination overshadowing Leela's attempts. Emma, sitting quietly at the corner of the table, leaned over to Caleb. "She's panicking," she whispered. "Her plan is unraveling and she doesn't even realize it." Caleb smiled inwardly. Leela had underestimated not just him, but Vivienne, and the combination was proving devastating. He realized that the revenge he had sought wasn't just about humiliating Leela. It was about demonstrating control, poise, and strategy in ways she could not counter. Then came the turning point. Leela, in an effort to regain the upper hand, made a careless mistake. She disclosed a piece of insider information, something she assumed only her trusted friends would hear. Caleb, with subtle timing, corrected her publicly, without confrontation, without malice. The room shifted. Leela's credibility wavered, and murmurs rippled through the gathering. Adam, trying to salvage the situation, spoke up awkwardly. Leela shot him a sharp look, frustration evident. The damage was done. Caleb didn't need to raise his voice. The room itself had confirmed his quiet dominance. After the dinner, as they walked back to the car, Vivienne nudged Caleb. "See, chaos handled gracefully," she said. He laughed softly, and without spilling a drop of wine. But Caleb also felt something he hadn't anticipated, a growing admiration for Vivienne, not just as an ally, but as someone whose intellect, humor, and subtlety matched his own. In the middle of revenge, he was beginning to realize that strategy could be intoxicating, and so could partnership. That night, Caleb returned home and glanced at the stack of invitations Leela had sent him over the past weeks. Each one now seemed like a breadcrumb on a path he had mapped entirely. But with Vivienne, the path felt less like revenge and more like a story unfolding in ways neither of them had predicted. Weeks passed, and the subtle war Caleb and Vivienne waged began to take visible effect. Leela's attempts at influence grew desperate, her social media posts more performative, her carefully curated charm losing its shine. Caleb watched each misstep with a mixture of satisfaction and curiosity. He had never thought revenge could be this entertaining. Emma, still his quiet ally, provided updates from inside Leela's circle. Every panicked text or poorly timed comment was a data point in Caleb's carefully constructed plan. Leela's family, slowly realizing they had lost their leverage, floundered in minor social blunders, a fact Caleb observed with almost scholarly interest. Then came the first major crack. Leela, in a private conversation, openly criticized Adam in front of someone influential, attempting to assert control. Caleb received the report from Emma like a gift. Leela's overconfidence had created a vulnerability, one that he and Vivienne could subtly exploit. At a charity auction later that week, the plan unfolded. Leela arrived, radiant as always, attempting to regain dominance with carefully chosen words and a curated smile. Caleb and Vivienne entered together, a quiet force that drew attention without demanding it. They navigated the room with precision, subtly steering conversations, acknowledging influencers, and undercutting Leela's attempts without overt confrontation. It was a masterclass in control. Leela tried to intercept a key donor, but Caleb, with a well-timed compliment and a strategic joke, redirected the conversation. The donor laughed, nodded, and inadvertently solidified Caleb's social dominance. Leela's eyes flicked to him, frustration and awe mingling in equal measure. Vivienne leaned close, whispering in Caleb's ear, "This is too easy." Caleb smiled, "No, it's just satisfying." By the end of the evening, Leela's social footing had weakened. She left the auction flustered, Adam trailing behind, and Caleb realized that the meticulous orchestration of subtle influence, precise timing, and strategic alliances had brought him closer to achieving his goal. Not just revenge, but the complete dismantling of her control. And yet, amidst the triumph, Caleb felt a shift, an unexpected warmth when he glanced at Vivienne, who had executed every move with grace, intelligence, and a wicked sense of humor. Revenge had brought them together, but something else, something far more unpredictable, was beginning to grow. It happened sooner than Caleb expected. Leela, realizing her subtle tactics were failing, decided to confront him directly. The setting was deliberate, a quiet, upscale cafe where they could speak without an audience, yet still feel the pressure of the world outside. "You've gone too far," Leela began, voice low but sharp, her eyes flashing with anger. All of this, it's humiliating." Caleb leaned back, calm and collected. "It's not humiliation, it's consequence. You chose to vanish, to betray, to flaunt. I'm merely showing the results of those choices." She clenched her hands, struggling to maintain composure. "And Vivienne, that was strategic." Caleb nodded. "Perfectly strategic. She's brilliant, Leela. Loyal, sharp, and decisive, not like you." Leela's face flushed with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Caleb allowed a small, measured smile. "I'll admit, the strategy is enjoyable, but it's not just about revenge anymore. It's about clarity, understanding, and seeing that life has consequences." For the first time, Leela seemed to waver, the bravado cracking just slightly. Caleb realized that she hadn't anticipated the subtlety of his approach, the combination of precision, patience, and the quiet power of his new alliance with Vivienne. Emma's earlier words echoed in his mind. Sometimes allies can be useful even when they seem like enemies. He understood now that Leela's confrontation wasn't a threat, it was confirmation. The plan had worked. She was forced to face the reality she had avoided. Caleb stood, offering a final, polite nod. "I hope you understand, Leela. Actions have consequences." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, realizing the conversation had ended. She left the cafe, Adam trailing behind her, and Caleb felt a small sense of closure. Vivienne, waiting outside, smiled knowingly. "Well." Caleb exhaled. "Well," he said, "the ghost finally saw the light." And in that moment, he realized that revenge had been only part of the story. The unexpected part was what had grown alongside it. Trust, partnership, and perhaps something more. With Leela finally retreating from the stage Caleb and Vivienne had constructed, a strange calm settled over their lives. The meticulous planning, the subtle social maneuvers, and the calculated revenge had all come to fruition. Leela's influence was diminished, her attempts at control neutralized. Yet amid the triumph, Caleb noticed something unexpected. He was no longer consumed by anger. Vivienne had become more than a partner in strategy. She was clever, witty, and unflinchingly honest. She challenged him, made him laugh, and even on occasion softened the sharp edges of his scheming. In the quiet moments after their victories, Caleb found himself looking at her differently. One evening, as they reviewed the aftermath of a gala over wine in his apartment, Caleb realized the truth. Revenge had brought them together, but what had begun as a calculated alliance had transformed into something far more human. He felt a warmth, a connection, that had nothing to do with strategy or pride. It was genuine. Vivienne noticed his pause. "Thinking about her again?" she asked lightly, nodding toward a framed photo of Leela on the wall of the gallery they had visited. Caleb shook his head. "No, not really. I'm thinking about us." She raised an eyebrow, curious. I thought revenge would feel empty after it was done. But with you, it doesn't. I'm glad it brought us here," he admitted, the words feeling awkward yet sincere. Vivienne smiled softly, her hand brushing his. "I'm glad too, Caleb. But remember, the world doesn't stop just because we've won a small battle. We have to be careful and smart." Caleb nodded, understanding that the lessons of revenge, patience, strategy, subtlety had also prepared him for something far more challenging. Love that required trust, respect, and collaboration. For the first time in months, he felt a true sense of peace. The story of betrayal, revenge, and subtle victories had reached a turning point, and now a new chapter, one of unexpected affection and partnership, was beginning. Leela had retreated completely from the social scene Caleb and Vivienne now dominated. Invitations stopped arriving at her door, and her carefully curated online presence lost its sparkle. Caleb watched from the sidelines as she attempted to rebuild her life quietly, realizing that some lessons are learned only when the consequences are unavoidable. Caleb and Vivienne, on the other hand, thrived. Their partnership, initially forged in revenge, had evolved into something genuine. They moved through life with a combination of strategy, humor, and affection that made their relationship feel both thrilling and grounded. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park after a charity gala, Vivienne linked her arm through his. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked, amusement in her voice. Caleb chuckled. "You mean with the betrayal, the vanishing act, and the perfect timing of revenge?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "Crazy how things work out." "Crazy," he agreed. "But I wouldn't change a thing. It taught me patience, precision, and that some partnerships are worth more than revenge." Vivienne stopped and looked up at him. "You mean us?" Caleb nodded, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Exactly us." In that moment, the past, the betrayal, the humiliation, the plotting seemed distant, like a shadow fading at dawn. What remained was clarity, partnership, and a sense of justice delivered in the most subtle, elegant way possible. Revenge had been the spark, but love, unexpected, real, and a little mischievous, had become the fire. Months later, Caleb and Vivienne stood together at another gala, not as strategists plotting subtle revenge, but as partners celebrated for their generosity, intelligence, and charm. The social whispers that once centered around Leela's betrayal had quieted into admiration for the couple who had turned a story of heartbreak into one of power, grace, and subtle triumph. Caleb looked at Vivienne, her laughter ringing clear across the ballroom, and felt a rare, complete contentment. The meticulous revenge that had once consumed him felt like a distant memory, replaced by something far more enduring: trust, affection, and partnership built on respect and wit. Vivienne caught his gaze and smiled. "You've come a long way from brooding over betrayal." Caleb laughed softly. "And you've made the journey far more enjoyable." They moved through the crowd together, a team in every sense. The lessons of the past lingered, yes, but they no longer dictated their actions. Instead, they informed their choices, making them sharper, more thoughtful, and above all, united. Later, as the evening wound down, Caleb reflected on the path he had taken, from betrayal to vanishing fiancée, to a marriage born of strategy, to a social chess game, and finally to genuine love. It was a story of revenge, yes, but also of unexpected joy, growth, and the unpredictable twists that life offers when you least expect them. He reached for Vivienne's hand, squeezing it gently. "To new beginnings," he said. Vivienne's eyes sparkled with mischief and warmth. "To us," she replied. And together, they stepped forward, leaving the ghosts of the past behind, embracing the future, and discovering that sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones you never anticipated. The story was over, but their adventure had just begun.